People say no success comes without struggle, but in the world of fame, that struggle often becomes something darker, a pain that hides behind the lights, a silence behind the applause. Shania Twain's story is proof that even the brightest voices can be born from the deepest wounds. Her journey, from a hungry child in northern Canada to one of the best-selling artists in music history, is one of heartbreak, survival, and courage. But as her life reached unimaginable heights, tragedy never stopped following her shadow. Born as Eileen Regina Edwards on August 28, 1965, in Windsor, Ontario, she came into a world that had very little to offer. Her mother, Sharon, was a gentle spirit, loving, devoted, and creative, while her father, Clarence Edwards, left when Shania was just 2 years old. It wasn't long before her mother remarried a man named Jerry Twain, an Ojibwe from the Temagami First Nation, who would later adopt Shania and her siblings. That's how Eileen became Shania Twain, a name that would one day echo across continents. Life in Timmins, Ontario, was anything but easy. The family faced poverty so deep that food was often scarce and winters felt longer than they should. Yet, in those quiet Canadian woods, Shania learned her first lessons in strength. She hunted rabbits to feed her family, chopped wood to keep them warm, and often wore the same clothes for years. There were nights when hunger gnawed at her stomach, but her spirit refused to bend. Music became her escape, the one thing that made sense in a world that often didn't. Her mother adored country music legends like Dolly Parton and Tammy Wynette, and little Shania sang along with every record, dreaming of a life far away from hardship. When she was just 8 years old, she began performing in small bars, community events, and local competitions. Her voice, clear, strong, and pure, stunned anyone who heard it. But behind those early smiles was a child growing up in a storm. Her home was far from peaceful. In later interviews, Shania would open up about the physical and emotional abuse that plagued her family. Her stepfather, Jerry, was a complex man, hard-working, proud, but haunted by his own demons. Shania spoke of nights filled with shouting, violence, and fear. She remembered vividly one horrific night when Jerry smashed her mother's head against a toilet, and young Shania thought she had died. That trauma stayed with her for life, a memory that no fame or fortune could erase. As a child, she often wished she could protect her mother. She even fantasized about escaping, about taking her siblings and running away into the woods where the pain couldn't follow. But she stayed, because she had to. And that sense of duty, of endurance, became the foundation of the woman she would one day become. Despite everything, music was her anchor. She would wake before dawn, write songs, and sing them quietly to herself. It wasn't about fame back then, it was survival, a way to hold on to something beautiful in an ugly world. When she was 13, her talent caught the attention of local producers, and soon she was performing on television shows like The Tommy Hunter Show, a major milestone for a small-town girl who had faced so much. But fate wasn't done testing her. In 1987, when Shania was just 22, her world shattered. Her parents, Sharon and Jerry, were killed in a devastating car accident. In an instant, she was orphaned, forced to become both mother and father to her younger siblings. While most people her age were chasing dreams, Shania was fighting to keep her family alive. She moved them all to Huntsville, Ontario, and took a job singing at a resort called Deerhurst. It wasn't glamorous, the lights were dim, the crowd small, but it paid enough to feed her brothers and sisters. Night after night, she sang other people's songs while suppressing her own grief. Each note was a mask, every smile was an act of survival. It was during this painful chapter that Shania found her voice, not just as a singer, but as a woman. She once said, "When I lost my parents, I also lost myself. But when I sang, I could hear who I was again." That realization became her fuel. She began writing songs that spoke of resilience, hope, and unbreakable spirit, themes that would define her future career. Eventually, her hard work paid off. Word of her performances spread, and in 1991, she caught the attention of Norro Wilson, a Nashville producer who saw in her something extraordinary. He invited her to record her first album, and with that, the quiet girl from Timmins was suddenly standing at the edge of her dreams. In Nashville, she adopted the name Shania, meaning, "I'm on my way," in tribute to her Ojibwe roots. And truly, she was. Her debut album in 1993 introduced her to the world, but it was her next step that would change everything. Robert John "Mutt" Lange, the legendary rock producer behind bands like Def Leppard and AC/DC, heard her voice and reached out. Their creative chemistry was instant, and so was their attraction. They married that same year, and together, they crafted a new sound, a blend of country, pop, and rock that no one had ever heard before. It was bold, fearless, and powerful, just like her. By 1995, The Woman in Me stormed the charts. It sold millions, earning her a Grammy and making her one of the most celebrated female artists of her time. But Shania wasn't done. In 1997, she released Come On Over, the album that would change music history forever. Songs like You're Still the One, From This Moment On, and Man, I Feel Like a Woman, became anthems of empowerment and love. With over 40 million copies sold, Come On Over remains the best-selling country album of all time. From poverty to global fame, from a battered child to a confident superstar, her story was the definition of triumph. But behind the glitter and the fame, cracks were beginning to show. Fame had healed her poverty, but not her pain. And the very things that had once made her strong were now threatening to break her again. Because while the world saw a woman who had everything, love, success, beauty, the truth was that Shania Twain was quietly losing the two things she valued most, her marriage and her voice. And when those two disappeared, so did she. At the turn of the new millennium, Shania Twain was untouchable. Her music had transcended borders, her image had become iconic, and her voice, that golden voice, was the sound of a generation. To the world, she was the symbol of confidence, power, and independence. But behind the spotlight, the woman who sang You're Still the One was fighting to keep her world from collapsing. Her marriage to Mutt Lange had been more than a love story, it was a creative empire. Together, they were unstoppable, partners in both art and life, blending his rock instincts with her storytelling soul. Their synergy had built one of the most successful careers in music history. But in 2008, the unthinkable happened. And it didn't just end their marriage, it broke her heart in ways that no song could heal. Shania had always trusted people deeply, perhaps too deeply. After years of fame, she longed for normalcy. In Switzerland, where she and Mutt had settled to escape the frenzy of fame, life seemed calm. They lived in a quiet village surrounded by the Alps, peaceful, simple, almost ordinary. Their close friends often visited, including Shania's best friend and personal assistant, Marianne Thibault. To Shania, Marianne was family, someone she trusted with her home, her son, and her secrets. But trust, as life would teach her again, can sometimes be the cruelest illusion. When the rumors started, Shania couldn't believe them. Someone had whispered that Mutt and Marianne were having an affair. It sounded absurd, impossible. These were the two people she loved and trusted most in her life. When she confronted Marianne, her friend denied everything. But soon, the truth surfaced, brutal, undeniable, and devastating. Her husband and her best friend had betrayed her. In one moment, the woman who had built her life on love and loyalty watched it all collapse. The betrayal wasn't just romantic, it was spiritual. Mutt had been her creative partner, her safe place, the one person she believed would never hurt her. And Marianne was like a sister. The shock was so deep that for a long time, she couldn't even find words for it. She once said, "I thought I would never sing again. It was like someone had stolen my voice, my spirit, my reason." But as if fate hadn't taken enough already, her physical voice, the very thing that had defined her life, began to fade. Around the same time, she was diagnosed with Lyme disease and dysphonia, a rare vocal disorder that affects the muscles of the voice box. Her once powerful, clear tone became strained and shaky. She could barely speak, let alone sing. Doctors warned her that she might never perform again. It was as if the universe had silenced her in every possible way, emotionally and physically. The betrayal had shattered her trust, the illness had stolen her instrument. And suddenly, Shania Twain, one of the greatest voices of her generation, disappeared from the world. 4 years, she retreated into isolation. She stopped touring, stopped recording, and withdrew from public life entirely. The woman who once stood on stadium stages before millions was now living quietly in pain, unable to recognize herself. In her memoir, she later admitted that she suffered deep depression during this time, crying endlessly, struggling to even get out of bed. Her heart, her career, her voice, everything had vanished. Her son, Aja, was the one reason she held on. She wanted him to have stability, even if she had none. In the silence of her Swiss home, she found herself writing again, not for fame, but for healing. The songs weren't meant for the radio. They were letters to herself, reflections of loss, grief, and resilience. She wrote about pain that didn't have an audience, about love that didn't survive, and about the courage to exist when the spotlight goes dark. But healing is never linear. Every day felt like a mountain she had to climb again. Her friends urged her to fight, to see doctors, to try vocal therapy, but Shania didn't believe she could return. She once said in an interview, "I felt like a bird who had lost her wings." The woman who once told the world to feel like a woman now felt invisible, silenced by life itself. Years passed. The tabloids wrote stories, the industry moved on, and new stars rose. But her fans never forgot her. They wrote letters, made tribute videos, and flooded social media with old performances, hoping one day she'd find her way back. And slowly, through the fog of pain, she began to listen. Ironically, redemption came from the very person connected to her heartbreak, Frederick Thibault, Marie-Anne's ex-husband. He too had been betrayed by the same two people. In their shared pain, Shania and Frederick found understanding, a friendship built not on romance, but on empathy. They leaned on each other, talked endlessly, and helped one another heal. What started as shared grief quietly turned into love. Shania once said that Frederick saved her life, not by fixing her, but by reminding her that broken hearts can still beat. In 2011, they married in Puerto Rico. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a peaceful new beginning. She had found love again, a different kind of love. Not the fireworks, but the warmth after the storm. But even as her heart began to mend, her voice still refused to return. Years of therapy brought little progress. She underwent open-throat surgery to strengthen her vocal cords, a risky procedure that could have ended her singing career permanently. But Shania had never been a quitter. The same girl who sang in bars at 8, who hunted for food to survive, who raised her siblings after tragedy, she was still in there somewhere. And slowly, through grit and determination, she began to sing again. The first time she heard her voice after years of silence, she cried. It wasn't perfect, it was raspy, fragile, scarred, but it was hers. It was the sound of survival. And that moment reignited something she thought she had lost forever: hope. By 2017, Shania Twain stood once again before the world, not as the untouchable superstar she once was, but as a woman who had faced death, betrayal, and silence, and refused to stay down. Her album now wasn't just a comeback, it was a confession. Every lyric carried pieces of her truth: pain, healing, forgiveness, and rebirth. It debuted at #1 in multiple countries, reminding everyone that Shania Twain was far from finished. But fame, she learned, was no longer the prize. Peace was. Her story wasn't about how loud she could sing anymore, it was about the courage to start over when the music fades. Because sometimes, the bravest sound in the world is silence. By the time Shania Twain re-emerged into the public eye, the world had changed, and so had she. The spotlight that once defined her now felt like a distant memory, something she looked at with both gratitude and caution. Years of silence had transformed her in ways that went far beyond her voice. There was a maturity in her presence now, a kind of quiet strength that comes only from surviving what once seemed unlivable. When she appeared again, fans saw the same familiar smile, but behind it was a woman who had lived through the kind of pain most people never see, the pain of losing everything and having to rebuild from the ashes of her own life. She spoke openly for the first time about what those lost years were like. The depression, the doubt, the physical agony of not knowing if her voice would ever return. And perhaps most heartbreaking of all, the fear that the world had moved on without her. Fame is a fragile thing. It loves loudly but forgets quietly. And for someone who had once been the best-selling female country artist in history, that silence can be deafening. Yet, instead of trying to reclaim her old glory, Shania decided to reinvent herself entirely. She wasn't trying to be the woman from Come On Over anymore. That version of her belonged to another time. Now, she was simply trying to be Shania, the human, not the legend. Her return to music wasn't easy. Recording again after years of vocal trauma felt like learning to walk after forgetting how to move. Every note was a battle. Every song a test of endurance. There were moments in the studio when she broke down, frustrated that her voice didn't sound the same, lower, raspier, scarred. But that imperfection, that raw edge, became her strength. It told her story better than any polished production ever could. She once said, "This is my voice now. It carries everything I've lived." And in that simple truth lay her rebirth. When Now released in 2017, it wasn't just a comeback, it was a resurrection. The album topped charts in the US, the UK, Canada, and Australia, marking her return after 15 long years. But for Shania, numbers didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that she had done it, that she had found her way back from silence. The songs carried echoes of everything she'd endured: heartbreak, betrayal, loss, healing, and ultimately, forgiveness. Tracks like Life's About to Get Good weren't just upbeat melodies, they were mantras. Reminders that no matter how far she had fallen, light still existed somewhere ahead. But even as her career found its rhythm again, the challenges didn't stop. Aging in the music industry, especially for women, comes with its own kind of cruelty. The world that once worshipped her youth and beauty now scrutinized every wrinkle, every tone of her voice, every sign of change. Social media had given rise to a new generation of artists and critics, and Shania found herself facing questions that went far beyond music. Could a woman in her 50s still be relevant? Could she still command the same presence she had in her 20s? For someone who had spent her entire life defying expectations, she decided to answer those questions not with words, but with grace. She stepped back into the spotlight on her own terms, not to chase trends or to compete, but to celebrate survival. Her tours were no longer about proving herself to anyone. They were about reconnecting with the people who had grown up with her. Fans who had listened to her songs in their youth now came with their own children, standing shoulder to shoulder in stadiums, singing every word. For Shania, that was the true victory. Not the fame, not the applause, but the connection that endured. When she looked out into the crowd, she no longer saw fans. She saw reflections of herself, people who had also lost, loved, fallen, and found a way back. Still, life continued to test her. In 2022, after nearly a decade of health struggles, Shania faced another major surgery, this time to correct long-term damage to her throat. The procedure was dangerous. There was a real chance that she might lose her voice permanently. Yet, once again, she faced it head-on. She later revealed that the recovery was brutal. Months of therapy, endless silence, and moments of fear where she wondered if she'd made a mistake. But the outcome was miraculous. Her voice returned stronger, richer, and filled with new texture. Not the same voice the world once knew, but a more mature, soulful one that carried the weight of everything she'd survived. In interviews that followed, she often reflected on how tragedy had shaped her perspective on life. She said, "I've learned to accept my scars. They're part of my voice now." That statement resonated deeply with millions around the world. Because Shania's story wasn't just about music, it was about the universal human experience of falling and getting back up again. It was about what happens when the world stops applauding, and you're left alone with yourself. How do you rebuild? How do you keep singing when your heart is broken? For Shania, the answer was simple: you just do. Because the act of continuing, of refusing to give up, becomes its own kind of song. Her 2023 album, Queen of Me, was more than a title. It was a declaration. It was Shania reclaiming her identity after years of letting others define her. It celebrated independence, resilience, and womanhood in all its imperfect glory. Gone was the fear of being judged. In its place was unapologetic self-expression. She performed in sparkling outfits, danced with the energy of someone half her age, and laughed freely on stage, something she once thought she'd never do again. Behind her joy was still pain, but it was now transformed, softened, and woven into the music that carried her forward. She often spoke about her mother, Sharon, and how her memory guided her through everything. Losing her at 22 had been a wound that never fully healed, but over time, Shania learned to see her presence in the little things, in the quiet moments before a show, in the strength she found during hard times, in the tenderness she carried toward others. Her mother's dream had been to see her daughter sing for the world, and in a way, Shania always felt like every performance was a tribute to her. "Every time I'm on stage," she once said, "I feel her there with me." Now, at 60, Shania Twain carries herself with the poise of someone who has lived many lives. She is no longer the bright-eyed girl from Timmins who sang in bars for food, nor the superstar standing under glittering lights, nor the heartbroken woman silenced by pain. She is all of them, a mosaic of survival. Her voice might sound different, but her spirit has never been stronger. She knows now that success doesn't protect anyone from tragedy, it only magnifies what's already there. What truly defines a person is how they rise after the fall. When asked what keeps her going, Shania often smiles and says, "Gratitude." After all she's endured, the loss of her parents, the betrayal, the illness, the silence, gratitude remains her compass. Gratitude for the fans who never stopped believing in her, for the son who became her anchor, and for the voice that, though changed, still carries her truth. She once said, "I used to sing to survive. Now, I sing to live." And in those words lies the heart of her story, a woman who lost everything, yet somehow found herself again through the very thing that nearly destroyed her. As she continues to perform, there's a sense of peace that surrounds her. She doesn't chase the spotlight anymore, it follows her naturally, drawn to the light she's built from within. She knows that pain and beauty often walk hand in hand, that love can both heal and break, and that life, in all its cruelty and grace, is still worth singing about. And so, she does. Not for fame, not for perfection, but for the simple, powerful joy of being alive. Because after everything, Shania Twain has learned that the most beautiful songs are not born from happiness. They are born from heartbreak, from loss, from the quiet decision to keep singing, even when the world has gone silent. At 60, Shania Twain stands in a space that very few people ever reach, a place beyond fame, beyond pain, where the applause has faded, but the truth still echoes. Her life today is quieter, but not empty. It's full in a different way, full of meaning, of reflection, of gratitude. The woman who once ruled the charts and sold out arenas around the world now spends much of her time in peace, surrounded by nature, love, and memories. She lives in a home that overlooks endless stretches of beauty, the mountains, the sky, and the soft rhythm of the earth that once gave her comfort when everything else fell apart. For the first time in decades, she no longer feels like she's running, not from the past, not toward success, but simply existing in the moment she has. There's something poetic about how her story has come full circle. The girl who once found solace in the woods of Timmins, Ontario, now finds that same peace again in the quiet corners of her life. She's traded stadium lights for sunsets, red carpets for the warmth of her kitchen, award speeches for slow mornings with coffee and silence. The world may still see her as the superstar who changed country music forever, but Shania has learned to see herself as something else entirely. Just a woman who endured, who loved deeply, and who refused to stay broken. Her days now revolve around things that fame can't buy: family, creativity, and the small joys that once got lost in the noise. Her son, Aja, has grown into an artist himself, a musician and producer who shares her passion for sound, though he prefers to stay out of the spotlight. Watching him find his own path brings her a kind of joy that no award ever could. In interviews, she often speaks of him with pride, calling him her greatest achievement, her grounding force. She admits that motherhood, more than music, saved her from the darkest places in her life. "When I lost my parents," she once said, "I had to grow up fast. When I had my son, I learned how to live again." Yet even with the peace she's found, the past never disappears completely. Sometimes when she's alone, a memory will surface, a flash of her mother's laughter, a haunting echo of the night she lost her voice, or a headline that reminds her of the betrayal she endured. But instead of pain, those memories now bring perspective. They remind her of what she survived. They are no longer wounds, they are reminders of her strength. And maybe that's the gift of time. The scars don't vanish, but they soften, and one day you wake up realizing you've made peace with the things that once defined you. Shania's reflections on fame today are brutally honest. She doesn't romanticize it anymore. She knows what it gives, and what it takes. She has seen how easily the industry can consume the people inside it, how quickly love can become currency, and how loneliness often hides behind the biggest smiles. Fame doesn't fill the emptiness, she once said. It just hides it. It's a sobering truth from someone who lived through the extremes of both glory and despair. Yet, despite it all, she still believes in the power of art, in the ability of a song to heal, to unite, to remind people that they're not alone. At 60, she carries herself with a kind of confidence that no longer needs validation. She laughs more easily now, not because her life is perfect, but because she finally understands that perfection was never the goal. The fans who see her today on stage might notice the changes, the deeper lines on her face, the rasp in her voice, but those aren't flaws. They're history. They're proof that she lived, that she fought, and that she's still here. In a world obsessed with youth, Shania stands proudly as a woman who has grown older in the public eye without apology. Aging is not losing beauty, she says. It's gaining authenticity. Her relationship with Frederick remains strong, rooted not in glamour but in understanding. They share a bond forged in pain, built on mutual respect, patience, and quiet love. Together, they travel, explore, and find joy in the simple things: a meal cooked together, a walk by the water, a night spent laughing about nothing. Their love story is unconventional, born from heartbreak, but it has become one of the most genuine chapters of her life. In Frederick, Shania found what fame never gave her: stability, loyalty, and peace. She has also become more open about her struggles, speaking candidly about body image, aging, and insecurity. There were times she admitted she couldn't bear to look in the mirror, times when illness and trauma made her feel disconnected from her own reflection. But those feelings, instead of consuming her, became fuel for a new kind of honesty in her music. In recent years, she's used her platform to encourage others, especially women, to embrace their imperfections, to see beauty not as something to preserve, but as something to evolve with. I've been stripped down to nothing so many times, she says, but each time, I discovered a stronger version of myself underneath. Her performances now feel like conversations rather than spectacles. When she sings "You're Still the One" in front of a crowd, there's a tenderness in her eyes that didn't exist before. It's no longer just a love song, it's a message to life itself. You're still the one I choose, even after everything. Her voice might crack on certain notes, but those cracks only make it more real. The audience doesn't want perfection, they want truth. And Shania, more than ever, has become a vessel for truth. Sometimes, she speaks about mortality, not with fear, but with acceptance. Losing her parents so young taught her that life is fragile, and surviving so many storms taught her that it's also precious. She doesn't see aging as a decline, but as a reward, proof that she made it through everything that tried to destroy her. I've already lived a few lifetimes, she once said softly. Every year now is a bonus. That wisdom, that quiet acceptance, has become her greatest legacy. She no longer measures success by fame or sales. Her measure is simple: peace of mind. In moments of solitude, she still writes. Not for the charts, not for the critics, but for herself. Her notebooks are filled with reflections, half-finished lyrics, and small notes about life. She writes about forgiveness, about the beauty of impermanence, about learning to let go. The girl who once wrote songs about love and heartbreak now writes about freedom. The freedom that comes when you stop trying to control everything and simply let life unfold. To her fans, Shania Twain remains an icon, a woman who defined an era, changed the face of country pop, and inspired millions to believe in themselves. But to those who know her story, she represents something even more powerful: resilience. Because Shania's journey was never just about music. It was about survival, about how to keep singing when the world takes away your voice, about how to love again when your heart has been shattered, about how to find light after losing everything. As she celebrates her 60th year, the world sees not just a star, but a survivor. The heartbreaking tragedy of Shania Twain is not simply in the pain she endured, but in the grace with which she lived through it. Every scar, every silence, every tear, they all became part of the melody that defines her life. And maybe that's what makes her story so human, so timeless. Because in the end, her greatest achievement wasn't fame or fortune, it was the courage to keep going. And as the lights fade and her voice echoes one last time, there's a stillness that follows, not of emptiness, but of peace. Because after everything she's endured, Shania Twain finally stands where she was always meant to be, home, within herself. There comes a point in every legend story when the spotlight begins to dim, not because the light has faded, but because the person beneath it has finally found peace in the shadows. For Shania Twain, that time has come. She's no longer chasing hits or headlines. She's chasing sunsets, quiet laughter, and moments that can't be photographed. And maybe that's the most beautiful ending any artist could ask for, to step away not in defeat, but in grace. The world remembers her as the voice that broke barriers, the woman who made millions dance, cry, and believe in love again. But the truth behind her success was always pain, the kind that could have silenced her forever. She lost her parents before she was ready to say goodbye. She lost her voice when the world still wanted her song. She lost her marriage when she thought she had found forever. And yet, every time, she came back stronger, softer, wiser, but unbreakable. Because Shania Twain's real music was never just the melody she sang, it was the courage in her story. Every lyric carried the echoes of someone who refused to surrender, someone who knew that the show must go on, even when the stage collapses. That's why, decades later, her songs still touch something deep inside people. Because behind every beat, there's a heartbeat that's been bruised but never broken. When you see her now, standing beneath the golden glow of stage lights, her voice trembling with both power and vulnerability, you realize something. You're not just watching a singer. You're watching a survivor tell her story one last time. And when she looks into the crowd, smiling through the tears, it's as if she's saying to every soul out there, if I can make it through everything, so can you. That's what makes her legacy eternal. Not the records. Not the fame. But the reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just keeps singing. And as the music fades, as the final note hangs in the air, one thing becomes clear. The heartbreaking tragedy of Shania Twain isn't about loss, it's about victory. A victory of spirit. Of heart. Of a woman who turned pain into poetry, heartbreak into harmony, and silence into song. Today, Shania stands as living proof that even after the darkest nights, the dawn always comes. Her journey is more than a story. It's a mirror for anyone who has ever felt broken, lost, or forgotten. It tells us that healing doesn't erase the scars, it transforms them into art. So if you've ever faced something that tried to silence you, if you've ever had to rebuild your life from ashes, remember her story. Remember that strength isn't born in comfort, it's born in fire. Because like Shania Twain, you too have a song that deserves to be heard. And maybe, that's the real message behind her legacy, that no matter how much life takes away, the music inside you never truly dies. It waits, patiently, for you to sing again. This is Shania Twain. A voice that changed the world. A soul that survived the impossible. And a woman who taught us that no heartbreak, no betrayal, and no silence can ever steal your light, unless you let it. If her story touched your heart today, if it reminded you that strength can rise from pain, then make sure to subscribe, because here, we tell the stories that the world forgets. Stories of pain, redemption, and the kind of resilience that turns tragedy into triumph. Because just like Shania, every soul has a song worth hearing.